Chapter 1. The Invitation to Shadowbrook Manor. The winter of 1936 had settled over London like a heavy grey blanket, muffling the city's usual clamour and turning the Thames into a sluggish ribbon of steel. Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous in his habits, sat in his impeccably ordered flat at Whitehaven Mansions, nursing a cup of thick, sweet, hot chocolate. The fire crackled softly in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the symmetrical arrangement of his furniture. Poirot disliked disorder in any form, whether in a room, a mind, or a crime. On this particular afternoon, as rain pattered against the windows, his valet George placed a silver tray before him. Upon it lay a single envelope, thick and expensive, sealed with crimson wax bearing the impression of an elaborate crest, a raven perched upon a broken shield. "An invitation, monsieur," George announced with his customary restraint. Delivered by hand, the messenger awaited no reply. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with interest. He disliked surprises, yet he was irresistibly drawn to them. With delicate precision, he slit the envelope and withdrew a card of heavy cream stock. The message was written in a bold, angular hand. Shadowbrook Manor, Devonshire. My dear Monsieur Poirot, I find myself in need of the finest detective mind in Europe. A matter of some delicacy has arisen among my guests this coming weekend, and I should consider it the greatest favour if you would consent to join us. The fogs of Devon are thick at this season, but the hospitality shall be warm. Your presence would oblige me more than I can express. Yours sincerely, Sir Reginald Hargrove Poirot twirled his moustache thoughtfully. Sir Reginald Hargrove, a name known in financial circles, a baronet whose fortune had been built on shipping and, more recently, on shrewd investments in the armaments trade. The man was wealthy, reclusive, and rumoured to be ruthless in business. Yet this invitation carried an undertone of urgency, almost of desperation. Poirot set the card down and considered. He had no pressing case. His little grey cells had grown restless with inactivity. And there was something about the phrasing, a matter of some delicacy, that suggested more than mere social obligation. It hinted at secrets. Poirot adored secrets. "George," he called, "prepare my valises. We depart for Devon on the morrow." The journey southwest was tedious. The train from Paddington crawled through sodden countryside, the windows streaked with rain. Poirot occupied a first-class compartment alone, reading a slim volume of detective stories by a young author named Agatha Christie. Amusing, if somewhat fanciful. As the train descended into Devon, the weather worsened. Great banks of fog rolled in from the sea, swallowing hedgerows and church spires alike. By the time the local branch line deposited him at a tiny rural station, visibility had shrunk to a few yards. A sleek Bentley awaited him on the forecourt, its chauffeur muffled in a greatcoat. The man touched his cap. "Monsieur Poirot, Sir Reginald's compliments, sir. Nasty weather, but we'll have you at the manor in no time." The drive was eerie. The fog pressed close against the windows, turning the world into a swirling grey void. Headlights carved tunnels of light that revealed nothing but occasional glimpses of twisted oaks and stone walls. Poirot felt the isolation keenly. Shadowbrook Manor was remote indeed. At last the car slowed and turned between tall gateposts. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels as they ascended a winding drive. The fog parted briefly, revealing the manor itself, a sprawling Elizabethan pile of dark stone, its chimneys piercing the mist like accusatory fingers. Lights glowed faintly from mullioned windows, promising warmth within. The chauffeur opened the door, and Poirot stepped out into air, thick with damp and the faint scent of wood smoke. A butler emerged from the massive oak doors, his face grave beneath powdered hair. "Welcome to Shadowbrook Manor, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Reginald is expecting you." The entrance hall was magnificent. A cavernous space with a hammer-beam roof, suits of armour standing sentinel, and a vast fireplace where logs blazed. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes lined the walls, their colours muted by centuries of smoke. Yet despite the grandeur, Poirot sensed an atmosphere of tension, as though the house itself held its breath. Sir Reginald Hargrove appeared at the top of the great staircase, a tall, gaunt man in his late 50s, with iron-grey hair and piercing blue eyes. He descended with the stiffness of one who had suffered old wounds. "Monsieur Poirot!" His voice was deep, resonant. "You honour my house. I am profoundly grateful you came." Poirot bowed slightly. "It is my pleasure, Sir Reginald, though I confess, your invitation intrigued me greatly." The baronet's smile was thin. "All shall be explained in due course. Come, let me present you to my other guests. We are a small party, but diverse." He led Poirot into a long drawing-room panelled in dark oak. A fire roared here too, and around it clustered half a dozen people who turned to stare with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension. First was Lady Eleanor Hargrove, Sir Reginald's much younger second wife, beautiful in a cold, classical way, with platinum hair and eyes like winter seas. She greeted Poirot with perfect poise, though her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her glass of sherry. Next, Captain Richard Trevose, a weathered naval officer with a clipped moustache and restless hands. His gaze flicked constantly toward the windows, as though expecting something to emerge from the fog. Miss Diana Ashley, a bright young thing of perhaps 25, with bobbed auburn hair and a nervous laugh. She was introduced as Lady Eleanor's companion, though Poirot noted how her eyes lingered on a handsome young man across the room. This was Mr. Victor Langley, Sir Reginald's private secretary, tall, dark and impeccably dressed, with the kind of charm that bordered on calculation. He shook Poirot's hand with particular warmth. Dr. Malcolm Pierce, the family physician, was a stout, benevolent-looking man with gold-rimmed spectacles. Yet his benevolent gaze seemed to catalogue each person clinically. Finally, there was Mrs. Lavinia Blackstone, Sir Reginald's elder sister, a formidable woman in black bombazine, whose sharp features and sharper tongue suggested she missed nothing. As introductions concluded, Sir Reginald poured Poirot a glass of excellent Madeira. "You must be wondering why I summoned you here under such mysterious circumstances," the baronet said quietly, drawing Poirot aside. "The truth is, I have received threats." "Threats?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Anonymous letters. Accusations about certain business dealings during the war. Someone among my guests, or perhaps someone who knows them, wishes me ill. I wanted the greatest detective alive present should matters escalate." Poirot sipped his wine, his mind already cataloguing faces, relationships, tiny gestures. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing, isolating them completely. Telephone's lines could be cut, roads made impassable. "Most interesting," he murmured. "And these threats began when?" "Only recently. But tonight we are all together. Safe, one might hope." Yet, as dinner was announced and the party moved toward the dining hall, Poirot noticed how Sir Reginald glanced repeatedly at the swirling mist beyond the windows. And he observed something else. Every guest, without exception, seemed to carry their own private burden of unease. The fog had swallowed Shadowbrook Manor whole, and within its ancient walls, Hercule Poirot sensed the first faint stirrings of something dark and dangerous, something that his little grey cells told him would, before the weekend ended, demand all his celebrated skill. For in such isolation, with such a gathering of secrets, murder was never far away. Chapter 2. Arrival in the mists. The fog did not lift the following day. If anything, it thickened, turning the Devon countryside into a vast, formless sea of grey. One by one, the remaining guests arrived at Shadowbrook Manor, each emerging from the mist like figures in a dream or a nightmare. Hercule Poirot stood at the mullioned window of the drawing-room, watching the drive with the patience of a cat at a mouse-hole. He had risen early, taken his customary tisane, and arranged his toilette with precision. Now, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit with a perfectly scented tie, he observed the arrivals, noting every detail. The angle of a hat, the hesitation before stepping from a car, the quick glance over a shoulder. The first to appear was Captain Richard Trevose. His powerful Austin saloon materialized suddenly at the gates, headlights blazing through the murk. The captain alighted stiffly, his naval greatcoat buttoned to the throat. He barked an order at his chauffeur, who began unloading luggage with military efficiency. Poirot noted the captain's weathered face, the scar that ran from temple to jaw, souvenir of Jutland perhaps, and the restless energy that seemed barely contained. Ex-naval, Poirot murmured to himself, a man of action, impatient with inaction, dangerous perhaps when cornered. Next came Miss Diana Ashley and Mr. Victor Langley in a sporty red MG. The car skidded slightly on the wet gravel, and Langley swore audibly before catching himself. Miss Ashley laughed, a bright artificial sound that did not reach her eyes. She was fashionably dressed in a fur-trimmed coat and cloche hat, but Poirot observed how her gloved hands trembled as Langley helped her from the car. Ah, the young lovers, Poirot thought. Or perhaps not lovers yet. There is tension there. Desire, yes. But also fear. Dr. Malcolm Pierce arrived more sedately in a dignified Daimler, driven by a uniformed chauffeur who might have been his butler. The doctor was portly, benevolent, with gold spectacles that caught what little light penetrated the fog. He paused on the steps to speak earnestly to someone still inside the car, an invalid perhaps, but no one else emerged. Poirot filed this away. Last of all came Mrs. Lavinia Blackstone, Sir Reginald's elder sister, in an ancient Rolls-Royce that seemed to belong to another era. She descended with the majesty of a dowager empress, leaning heavily on an ebony cane topped with a silver raven's head, the same device that had sealed Poirot's invitation. Her black bombazine rustled like dry leaves as she swept into the hall, her sharp eyes missing nothing. By luncheon, all were assembled. The great dining hall, with its long oak table and flickering candles, for the fog made electric light necessary even at midday, presented a tableau of strange civility. Sir Reginald sat at the head, Lady Eleanor at the foot. Poirot was placed at Sir Reginald's right, a position of honour that did not escape the notice of Mrs. Blackstone, whose lips thinned disapprovingly. The meal was excellent. Clear soup, devilled kidneys, pheasant with all the trimmings. Yet the conversation lagged. The fog pressed against the windows like a living entity, muffling all outside sound. No birds sang, no wind stirred the bare branches, visible through the mist. Captain Trevose broke the silence first. "Damned peculiar weather," he growled, attacking his pheasant with unnecessary violence. Can't see a blasted thing out there. Like being at sea in a pea souper." "Richard, please," Lady Eleanor murmured. Her voice was cool, musical. "We have a distinguished guest." The captain glanced at Poirot. "No offence meant, monsieur. Just stating facts." "None taken, Captain," Poirot replied smoothly. "The fog is indeed remarkable. One might almost say oppressive." Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "The Devon mists are legendary. They roll in from the moor and can last for days. We are quite cut off, I'm afraid." Mrs. Blackstone gave a bark of laughter. "Cut off? We're buried alive, Reginald. No post, no telephone if the lines come down, no possibility of visitors or departure. You've chosen your moment well." Her brother shot her a warning glance. "Lavinia, really?" But Mrs. Blackstone was not to be silenced. "Don't Lavinia me. You invite this assortment of people to a house party in the worst weather of the year, and then act surprised when we're all on edge. Though I suppose that's why you brought Monsieur Poirot." Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on the detective. "To keep us all in order, perhaps?" Poirot inclined his head graciously. "Madame, I am merely a guest, though I confess Sir Reginald did mention certain concerns." A sudden silence fell. Victor Langley's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Miss Ashley's cheeks flushed becomingly. Even Dr. Pierce, usually imperturbable, adjusted his spectacles unnecessarily. Sir Reginald recovered first. "Nothing to alarm anyone. Merely some anonymous letters. Crank, probably, but one likes to be prepared." "Anonymous letters?" Captain Trevose leaned forward. "What sort of letters?" "Accusations," Sir Reginald said curtly. "About certain business dealings. Old history, nothing more." "Old history has a way of catching up," Mrs. Blackstone observed acidly, "especially when one invites the past under one's roof." Lady Eleanor rose gracefully. "Shall we take coffee in the drawing-room? The gentlemen may join us when they wish. No need for separation in these modern times." In the drawing-room, with its roaring fire and heavy velvet curtains drawn against the eternal grey outside, the atmosphere grew more intimate and more dangerous. Poirot positioned himself in a high-backed chair from which he could observe everyone. He noted how Miss Ashley contrived to sit near Victor Langley, though Lady Eleanor watched them with cool detachment. How Captain Trevose stood at the window, staring into the fog as though willing it to lift. How Dr. Pierce drew Sir Reginald aside for a quiet word, his expression grave. And he noted something else. The house itself seemed to hold secrets. During a momentary lull, he distinctly heard a faint scratching sound from behind the panelling, almost like fingernails on wood. When he turned sharply, there was nothing, but Mrs. Blackstone had heard it too. Her head snapped round, her cane tightening in her grip. Later, as the short winter afternoon faded into deeper gloom, Poirot took the opportunity to explore. The manor was a labyrinth of corridors, unexpected staircases, and rooms that seemed unused for decades. In the library, he found Sir Reginald alone, staring at a portrait of a stern Elizabethan ancestor. "You are troubled, mon ami," Poirot said softly. The baronet started. "Is it so obvious?" "To Hercule Poirot, yes. These letters, they disturb you more than you admit." Sir Reginald hesitated, then withdrew a folded paper from his pocket. "This arrived yesterday, before you came." Poirot took it. The message was printed in crude block letters. "You cannot hide what you did. Justice comes in the fog. One will die before the mist lifts." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Most dramatic. And you believe this threat is genuine?" "I don't know." Sir Reginald's voice was hoarse. but someone in this house hates me enough to write such things, and now we're trapped here together." A gong sounded for dinner. As they moved toward the dining hall, Poirot paused at a window. For a moment, the fog seemed to thin, revealing a glimpse of formal gardens below, clipped yew hedges forming a maze, a stone sundial, bare rose beds. And something else, a figure, indistinct but unmistakably human, moving swiftly between the hedges before vanishing into the mist. Poirot blinked. When he looked again, there was nothing but swirling grey. Inside or outside, friend or foe, the fog made everything uncertain. At dinner that evening, the strain was palpable. Conversation was brittle, laughter forced. The excellent food might have been sawdust for all the appreciation it received. Afterward, in the drawing-room, Sir Reginald proposed brandy and cards. But one by one, the guests pleaded fatigue and retired early. The great house settled into silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old timber and the perpetual soft hiss of fog against the windows. Poirot lingered longest, sitting before the dying fire. His little grey cells were busy, arranging and rearranging the pieces, the anonymous letters, the strained relationships, the scratching sound, the fleeting figure in the garden. Somewhere in this isolated manor, cut off from the world by impenetrable mist, danger was gathering. Someone among this small group nurtured hatred deep enough to kill, and Hercule Poirot, with his passion for order and symmetry, knew that before the fog lifted, blood would be spilled. As he finally mounted the great staircase to his room, a spacious chamber with a four-poster bed and heavy brocade curtains, he paused on the landing. From somewhere deep in the house came that scratching sound again, faint but unmistakable. Poirot's hand tightened on the banister. The game, he thought with a mixture of dread and exhilaration, had already begun. Chapter 3. The Evening Gathering. The great dining hall of Shadowbrook Manor glowed with candlelight that night, as if the house itself were trying to push back the fog that clung to every window. The long mahogany table had been set with exquisite care. Silver epagnes laden with hothouse flowers, crystal glasses catching the flames to bint, and the Hargrove-crested china gleaming under the chandeliers. Yet for all the elegance, the atmosphere was brittle, like thin ice over dark water. Hercule Poirot entered precisely at 8, his patent leather shoes silent on the ancient rugs. He paused in the doorway to survey the scene. Sir Reginald stood at the head of the table, immaculate in white tie, but his hand trembled slightly as he adjusted a wineglass. Lady Eleanor, in shimmering silver lame that set off her pale beauty, moved among the guests with the effortless grace of a perfect hostess. Yet Poirot noted the tightness around her lovely mouth. The others were already assembled. Captain Trevose, resplendent in an old-fashioned dinner jacket with medals glinting, stood by the fireplace nursing a whisky and soda. Victor Langley, sleek and dark in midnight blue, was pouring champagne for Miss Diana Ashley, whose emerald green gown made her look like a bright bird trapped in a sombre cage. Dr. Pierce sat quietly, observing everyone over the rims of his spectacles. Mrs. Lavinia Blackstone, swathed in black lace, occupied a high-backed chair like a throne, her cane planted firmly before her. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald greeted him with forced heartiness. "Come, let me seat you. We are all here now, no stragglers tonight." Poirot allowed himself to be placed between Lady Eleanor and Miss Ashley. As he sat, he caught the faint scent of gardenias from the younger woman, and the sharper note of expensive French perfume from the hostess. He filed both away. The meal began with oysters on the half-shell, served with a chilled chablis. Conversation was tentative at first, skirting dangerous topics. Captain Trevose launched into a tale of naval mishaps in fog off the China station. His voice boomed, but Poirot noticed how his eyes kept straying to Sir Reginald, measuring, calculating. Fog can play queer tricks, the captain concluded. A man thinks he sees a ship bearing down on him, and it turns out to be nothing but mist, or vice versa. An apt metaphor for life, Dr. Pierce murmured, helping himself to more oysters. We often mistake shadows for substance. Mrs. Blackstone gave a derisive snort. Some shadows are very substantial indeed, Doctor, especially when they concern money. Sir Reginald's knife clattered against his plate. Lavinia, must we— I merely observe, his sister continued implacably, that certain business dealings during the war cast very long shadows, shadows that reach even into this house. A frozen silence fell. Victor Langley hastily raised his glass. To our host's health, he proposed smoothly, and to the lifting of the fog. Everyone drank, but the toast felt hollow. The next course, consommé à la reine, was served by the butler and 2 footmen moving with silent efficiency. Poirot sipped the delicate broth and watched faces. Miss Ashley leaned toward him confidingly. "Isn't this house simply marvellous, Monsieur Poirot? So full of history." Lady Eleanor was telling me there are priest holes and secret passages everywhere. Indeed, Poirot's eyes twinkled. One wonders what secrets they still conceal. Lady Eleanor smiled thinly. Only dust and spiders now, I assure you, though the family legend claims a passage leads from the library to the old chapel ruins in the grounds. Romantic, Victor Langley said, his gaze lingering on Miss Ashley. A midnight escape route for star-crossed lovers, perhaps. Diana blushed. Captain Trevose scowled into his soup. Sir Reginald changed the subject firmly. "Monsieur Poirot, you must tell us about some of your famous cases. That affair of the Oriental Pearl, was it not?" Poirot obliged with a carefully edited version of the case, embellishing just enough to hold attention. Laughter rippled, genuine for a moment, as he described the criminal's absurd disguise. Even Mrs. Blackstone unbent slightly. But as the fish course arrived, sole poached in white wine, the conversation veered again into dangerous waters. Dr. Pierce, who had been quiet, spoke suddenly. "Sir Reginald, forgive me, but your heart. Have you been taking the digitalis regularly? This damp weather cannot be good for you." The baronet flushed. "I am perfectly well, Malcolm. No need to fuss." "Digitalis?" Mrs. Blackstone pounced. "Since when have you needed heart medicine, Reginald? You never mentioned it in your letters." "It is a recent development," Sir Reginald said stiffly. "Nothing serious." Lady Eleanor laid a hand on his sleeve. "Darling, we all worry. Dr. Pierce is only concerned." But Poirot noted how Victor Langley's eyes narrowed at the exchange, and how Miss Ashley suddenly found her plate fascinating. The main course, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, was carved at table by Sir Reginald himself, a ritual that seemed to steady him. Yet, as he passed the first plate to his wife, his hand shook again, and a drop of blood-red gravy fell onto the white damask cloth like a wound. "Clumsy of me," he muttered. "Nerves," Mrs. Blackstone observed, "or conscience." "Lavinia," Lady Eleanor's voice cut like crystal, "that is enough." The older woman met her gaze unflinchingly. "Is it? We are all family here, or near enough. Certain truths should not be buried in fog." Captain Trevose slammed his fist on the table, making glasses jump. By God, madam, if you have accusations, make them plainly." "I accuse no one," Mrs. Blackstone replied coldly. "Yet. But someone in this room knows why my brother has been receiving poisonous letters. Someone knows about the munitions contracts in 1917, and the ships that never reached port, and the profits that were made while men died." Sir Reginald rose abruptly. "I will not have this at my table." For a moment, chaos threatened. Then Poirot's calm voice cut through. "Mesdames et messieurs, let us not spoil an excellent dinner with ancient history. The past is past. Tonight, we are all guests beneath one roof, isolated by the fog. Let us enjoy the present." Slowly, tension eased. Sir Reginald sat. Conversation resumed, stilted, careful, on neutral topics. The King's recent abdication crisis, the latest films, the prospects for peace in Europe. Dessert, Charlotte Russe with brandied cherries, was served, followed by savouries and port for the gentlemen, while the ladies withdrew. But modern custom prevailed, and soon all gathered in the drawing-room for coffee and liqueurs. The great fireplace roared, but the room still felt cold. Outside, the fog seemed thicker than ever, pressing against the French windows like a blind, malevolent face. Poirot accepted a balloon of Armagnac and positioned himself near the fire, observing. Victor Langley and Diana Ashley stood close together by the gramophone, selecting records. A slow foxtrot began to play, something sentimental by Jack Hilton. Langley asked Diana to dance. She glanced at Lady Eleanor, who gave a tiny nod. The young couple moved together in the centre of the room, graceful but self-conscious. Captain Trevose watched them broodingly, then crossed to Sir Reginald. "A word in private, sir." The baronet hesitated, then led the captain to the library. Dr. Pierce drew Mrs. Blackstone into conversation about her rheumatism. Lady Eleanor sat alone on a sofa, staring into the fire, her beautiful face unreadable. Poirot sipped his Armagnac and listened to the house. Old houses always spoke if one knew how to listen. He heard the wind moaning in the chimneys, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, and faintly that scratching sound again, from somewhere behind the panelling. He moved casually along the wall, pretending to examine a portrait. The sound stopped abruptly. When Sir Reginald and Captain Trevose returned, both men looked grim. The captain's face was flushed, Sir Reginald's pale. The gramophone wound down. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of logs. It was then that the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. A collective gasp rose. Darkness swallowed the room, complete and absolute. "Stay calm," Sir Reginald's voice came. "The generator must have failed. There are candles." A match flared. Lady Eleanor's face appeared ghostly in the sudden light as she lit the candelabrum on the mantel. Other candles were found. The room emerged from blackness, shadows leaping grotesquely. But in that brief darkness, Poirot had heard something else. A soft footfall behind him, and the faintest whisper of fabric brushing past. When light returned, everyone was in their places, except Victor Langley, who stood suddenly apart from Diana, his face white. "Someone touched my arm," he said hoarsely. "In the dark. A hand cold as ice." "Nonsense," Mrs. Blackstone snapped. "Imagination." But Poirot saw fear in several faces. The fog outside seemed to pulse against the windows, as though the house were under water. Sir Reginald proposed early retirement. No one disagreed. As the party dispersed up the great staircase, candles in hand, Poirot lingered. He watched the shadows they cast, elongated, distorted, climbing the walls like pursuing demons. At the landing, he paused. From the corridor below came a new sound, a soft, deliberate knock 3 times on the front door. In the stunned silence, Sir Reginald's voice floated up. "Who on earth?" The butler opened the great oak door. Fog billowed in like smoke. There was no one there. Only a single white envelope lay on the step, addressed in crude block letters to Sir Reginald. The butler brought it in. Sir Reginald tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sheet. The first warning was ignored. Tonight was mercy. Tomorrow, justice. The paper slipped from his hand and fluttered to the floor like a dying bird. Above, on the landing, Poirot felt the chill deepen. The evening gathering had revealed fractures, old hatreds, buried secrets. Now the threat had become explicit. In the fog-shrouded manor, with every exit sealed by mist, the countdown to murder had truly begun. Chapter 4. The Midnight Scream. The house settled into an uneasy quiet after the discovery of the second anonymous note. Candles were extinguished one by one, footsteps faded along the upper corridors, and doors closed with deliberate softness, as though loudness might provoke whatever lurked in the fog. Hercule Poirot, however, did not retire immediately. He lingered in the great hall, watching the butler secure the front door with heavy bolts and chains. "You expect no further visitors tonight, monsieur?" Poirot asked quietly. The butler, a man named Hargreaves with the impassive face of long service, shook his head. "No one could reach us in this, sir. The drive is impassable now. Even the telephone line went dead an hour ago. We are quite alone." Alone. The word hung in the cold air like frost. Poirot nodded, wished the man good night, and mounted the stairs to his guest chamber on the east wing. His room was large and baronial. A 4-poster bed draped in faded tapestry, a fireplace where embers still glowed, and tall windows rattling faintly under the pressure of the mist. Poirot performed his nightly ritual with precision, folding his clothes, arranging his toilet articles in perfect alignment, twirling his moustaches before the mirror. Only then did he slip between the sheets. Sleep, however, would not come easily. His little grey cells were too active, turning over the evening's revelations like cards in a game of patience. The accusations about wartime profits, the strained glances between Lady Eleanor and Victor Langley, the captain's barely concealed anger, Mrs. Blackstone's venom, Dr. Pierce's careful watchfulness, and always the fog, thick, impenetrable, complicit. At length Poirot dozed but lightly. He woke once, certain he had heard that scratching again, closer this time, as though inside the wall beside his bed. He sat up, listening, nothing, only the soft moan of wind in the chimneys and the perpetual hush of the mist. He glanced at the luminous dial of his travelling clock. 12:47 a.m. He lay back, eyes open in the darkness, and waited. It came at 1:13 precisely. A scream! Not a muffled cry, not a whimper, but a full-throated, piercing scream of pure terror that tore through the silent house like a knife. It rose, wavered, and cut off abruptly, leaving a silence more shocking than the sound itself. Poirot was out of bed in an instant, slipping on his dressing gown and slippers. He seized the candle left burning low on his nightstand and stepped into the corridor. Doors were opening all along the east wing. Figures emerged in various states of undress, faces pale in the flickering light. "What in God's name?" Captain Trevose's voice boomed as he appeared in pyjamas and a naval greatcoat thrown over his shoulders. "That was Diana!" Victor Langley cried. his hair dishevelled, eyes wild. He was already running toward the west wing, where the younger guests had been placed. Poirot followed swiftly, his short legs moving with surprising speed. Others joined the rush. Lady Eleanor in a silk robe the colour of moonlight, Dr. Pierce clutching a black medical bag, Mrs. Blackstone leaning heavily on her cane, but keeping pace with grim determination. Sir Reginald brought up the rear, his face ashen. They converged on Miss Ashley's door at the end of the west corridor. It stood slightly ajar. Langley pushed it open without ceremony. The room was in chaos. The bedclothes were flung back, one pillow lay on the floor, and the bedside lamp had been overturned, its bulb shattered. But Miss Diana Ashley was there, alive, sitting upright in bed, her hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. "Diana!" Langley rushed to her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head violently, unable to speak at first. Lady Eleanor moved forward, taking the girl's trembling hands. "Breathe, my dear. You're safe now. What happened?" Diana's voice came in a whisper. "There was someone in the room, standing at the foot of the bed. I woke up and saw a figure, tall, dark, just watching me. I screamed, and it vanished." "Vanished?" Captain Trevose strode to the window. The heavy curtains were drawn, but he yanked them aside. The casement was securely latched from the inside. Outside, nothing but swirling fog. "Door was open when we arrived," Poirot observed calmly, "but no one in the corridor when I emerged." Dr. Pierce examined the girl quickly. "Shock, nothing more. A drop of brandy, perhaps." Sir Reginald, who had been standing frozen in the doorway, suddenly pushed past them all. He crossed to the fireplace, cold and empty, and ran his hand along the oak panelling beside it. "Here," he said hoarsely, "a panel moves." He pressed, and a section of the wall swung inward with a faint groan, revealing a narrow blackness beyond. "A priest's hole?" Lady Eleanor whispered. "More than that," Sir Reginald replied. "Part of the old passage system. It runs behind most of the guest rooms on this floor." Poirot stepped forward, holding his candle high. The opening was just wide enough for a man to slip through sideways. Dust lay thick on the stone threshold. In it, faint but unmistakable, was the print of a shoe, large, narrow, with a distinctive pattern on the sole. "Someone has used this very recently," Poirot murmured. "But, observe, the dust is disturbed only inward. Whoever entered came this way, but did not leave by the same route. Or, the print was made when entering earlier, and the intruder departed through the door." Mrs. Blackstone's voice was icy. "So, anyone in the house could have crept along these passages and terrified the girl." "Not anyone," Poirot corrected gently. "Someone who knows the Manor's secrets. Someone familiar with the hidden ways." Langley rounded on Sir Reginald. "You might have warned us your house was riddled with secret passages." "I believed them sealed years ago," the baronet protested. "I had no idea." "Enough," Poirot intervened. "Mademoiselle Ashley has suffered a shock. Let us allow Dr. Pierce to administer a sedative. Tomorrow, in daylight, if daylight ever returns, we shall examine these passages thoroughly." The group dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Sir Reginald ordered Hargreaves to post a footman in the corridor for the remainder of the night. Miss Ashley was moved to a different room, with Lady Eleanor insisting on staying with her. Poirot returned to his own chamber, but he did not sleep again. Instead, he sat by the window, candle guttering low, staring into the fog. At 3:15 a.m., he heard it, soft footsteps in the corridor outside his door. They paused, the handle turned slowly, almost imperceptibly. Then silence. Poirot rose without a sound and crossed to the door. He waited, listening. After a long minute, the footsteps retreated. He opened the door a crack. The corridor was empty, the posted footman dozing in a chair at the far end. Poirot closed the door and returned to his chair. But at 4:17 a.m., he noted the exact time on his clock. The scream came again. This time it was different, shorter, sharper, ending in a dreadful gurgle. And this time it came from below, from the direction of the library. Poirot was first into the corridor again. Doors opened once more, but slower now, as though fear had begun to paralyze movement. They descended the great staircase in a huddled group, candles trembling in their hands. The library door stood wide open. Inside, the fire had burned low, casting long shadows across leather-bound books and antique globes. Sir Reginald Hargrove lay sprawled on the Persian rug before the hearth, face down. A dark stain spread slowly across the back of his dinner jacket, soaking into the intricate pattern beneath him. Dr. Pierce knelt swiftly, turning the body over. A narrow-bladed dagger, ornamental, Eastern in design, protruded from Sir Reginald's chest just below the heart. His eyes were wide, staring at the ceiling in final surprise. Blood had trickled from the corner of his mouth, that dreadful gurgle. Dr. Pierce felt for a pulse, then shook his head. "Dead," he said quietly. "Not more than a few minutes." Captain Trevose swore under his breath. Lady Eleanor gave a small, choked cry and turned away. Victor Langley stood frozen, Diana clinging to his arm, though she had been brought down against advice. Mrs. Blackstone stared at her brother's body with an expression unreadable. Shock, perhaps, or something colder. Poirot knelt beside the corpse, careful not to disturb it unduly. He noted the position. Sir Reginald had been standing facing the fire when struck. The dagger had been driven downward with great force, suggesting either passion or considerable strength. There were no signs of a struggle. A half-empty glass of whisky stood on a side table beside an open humidor. Cigars had been smoked. One stub still smouldered in an ashtray. Poirot's keen eyes moved to the French windows that opened onto the terrace. One was unlatched, curtains stirring faintly in a draught. Fog drifted in like smoke. "Someone entered or left this way," he said. Captain Trevose strode over and examined the catch. "No sign of forcing. Whoever it was knew how to open it quietly." "Or was admitted by Sir Reginald himself," Poirot added softly. He rose and surveyed the room. On the desk lay the latest anonymous note, the one delivered at the door. Beside it, a fresh sheet of paper on which Sir Reginald had evidently been writing. The pen lay across it, ink still wet. Poirot read the unfinished letter aloud. "My dear Malcolm, if anything should happen to me tonight, I wish you to know that the accusations are—" It ended there. Dr. Pierce's face was grim. He was trying to tell me something, perhaps to clear his name, or to name his killer. Outside, the fog remained absolute. No footprint could survive on the terrace stones for more than moments. Already, the mist had erased any trace. Poirot turned to the assembled group, his small figure suddenly commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said gravely, "we are confronted with murder. The telephone is dead, the roads impassable. No help can reach us, nor can the murderer escape. We are sealed together in this house with a killer. From this moment, no one must be alone. Doors must be locked. And tomorrow, Hercule Poirot will begin his investigation in earnest. For the little grey cells, they tell me this: the murderer is among us." And the fog it hides nothing from the truth. As the first pale suggestion of dawn struggled uselessly against the mist, the inhabitants of Shadowbrook Manor stood in the blood-stained library, staring at their dead host. And somewhere in the ancient walls, Poirot felt certain the hidden passages waited, silent witnesses to a crime that was only the beginning. Chapter 5. Interrogations in the Fog. Morning never truly arrived at Shadowbrook Manor. A dull pearl-grey light filtered through the fog, turning the house into a dim aquarium, where shadows lingered in every corner. Breakfast was a silent affair in the morning room. Cold ham, eggs kept warm under silver domes, toast that no one touched. The servants moved with unusual quietness, their faces pale, as though the murder had seeped into the very walls. Hercule Poirot ate nothing. He drank only a cup of strong coffee, black as midnight, and observed the survivors with the intensity of a surgeon preparing to operate. Sir Reginald's body had been moved to an unused ground-floor room and covered with a sheet. Dr. Pierce had declared that nothing more could be done until the police arrived, if they ever could. The telephone remained dead. The drive was a quagmire. They were prisoners of the mist and of their own suspicions. At 10 o'clock, Poirot summoned everyone to the library. The bloodstain on the Persian rug had been covered with a drugget, but the air still carried the faint metallic tang of death. The French windows were locked now, curtains drawn against the endless grey. Outside. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, standing before the cold fireplace, his small figure impeccably dressed in a dark three-piece suit. "We find ourselves in a situation most grave. A murder has been committed under this roof, and the murderer is one of us. No one has entered or left since the fog descended. Therefore, the truth lies within these walls, and within one of you." He paused, letting the words settle. "I shall interview each of you privately. I ask only that you speak the truth. Lies, even small ones, distort the symmetry of the facts. And Hercule Poirot insists upon symmetry." He began with the staff, dismissing the others to the drawing-room under the watchful eye of Captain Trevose, who had appointed himself unofficial guardian of order. The butler, Hargreaves, was first. A man of 50 years' service, he stood ramrod straight, face expressionless. "Sir Reginald retired to the library after the disturbance in Miss Ashley's room," he told Poirot. "He asked for a whisky and soda to be sent down. I took it myself at about 1:30. He was alone, seated at his desk writing. He seemed preoccupied. Said he might work late and did not wish to be disturbed again. Did you notice anything unusual?" "Only that the French window was unlatched. I remarked upon it. Damp air is bad for the books. Sir Reginald said he had opened it for a moment to clear cigar smoke. I latched it myself before leaving." Poirot nodded. "And later, did you hear anything?" "I retired at 2. The house was quiet until the second scream. The footman on corridor duty confirmed he had dozed briefly, but heard nothing until the alarm. The maids had seen no one." Poirot dismissed the staff and began with the guests. He started with Dr. Malcolm Pierce. The doctor sat heavily in the leather chair opposite Poirot, spectacles glinting. "You were Sir Reginald's physician and friend," Poirot said. "Tell me about his heart condition." "Angina pectoris," Pierce replied. "Not severe, but exacerbated by stress. I prescribed digitalis. He had been under considerable strain lately. Those anonymous letters." "You knew their contents?" "Some. He showed me the first 2. Accusations of war profiteering, specifically that he deliberately delayed certain munition shipments for higher profits, while men died at the front. He swore it was untrue, but the letters distressed him greatly. And last night he began a letter to you, it seems." Pierce's face tightened. "Yes, if anything should happen to me, he must have feared the worst. I wish he had finished it. Where were you between 1 and 4 this morning?" "In my room, asleep until the first scream. Then with the others until we discovered the body." Poirot thanked him and moved on. Mrs. Lavinia Blackstone entered next, cane tapping ominously. "You disliked your brother's second marriage," Poirot observed without preamble. "I considered it unsuitable," she replied coldly. "Eleanor is 30 years his junior, and brought no fortune. But I did not murder him for it. Yet you accused him openly of profiteering. I accused him of things that needed saying. Someone had to. But I did not send those letters to, and I did not stab him. Your room is on the ground floor, madame, close to the library. I am a cripple, monsieur. I walk with difficulty. To creep silently through the house and strike a fatal blow? Impossible." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps, and between 1 and 4? "Asleep, alone. I heard nothing until the screams." Captain Richard Trevose was next. He strode in like a man boarding an enemy vessel. "You asked Sir Reginald for a private word after dinner," Poirot said. "What passed between you?" The captain's jaw tightened. "Private business." "Murder makes all business public, mon capitaine." Trevose glared, then relented. "I invested money with Hargrove after the war, on his advice, lost everything in the crash of 29. I believed he had deliberately misled me. Last night I demanded restitution. He refused. Said it was ancient history. You were angry, damned angry, but I didn't kill him. I went to my room after the lights failed, smoked a pipe and slept, woke to the girl's scream, then the second. Your room is above the library. You might easily have descended." "I might have," Trevose admitted grimly, "but I did not." Lady Eleanor Hargrove entered last of the morning sessions. She was pale but composed, dressed in severe black that accentuated her beauty. "You loved your husband?" Poirot asked gently. "I was fond of him," she replied carefully. "He was kind to me. But it was not a grand passion, if that is what you mean." "And Mr. Victor Langley?" Her eyes flashed. "That is impertinent. Murder makes all things pertinent, madame." She hesitated. "Victor and I knew each other before my marriage. There was an understanding. But Reginald offered security, position. I chose that. And now? Now Reginald is dead, and I am a widow with very little money. His will leaves everything to a trust controlled by his sister." Her voice was bitter. "Where were you last night?" "With Diana after her fright, until we all rushed downstairs. Before that, in my room." "Alone?" "Yes." Poirot dismissed her and called Victor Langley. The young secretary was nervous, fingers drumming on his knee. "You hope to marry Lady Eleanor?" Poirot said bluntly. Langley flushed. "Yes. She married Hargrove for money. I couldn't offer that then. But if he died, convenient." "I didn't kill him," Langley burst out. "I was in my room all night. After the lights went out, I went to Diana's door, wanted to make sure she was all right. But I heard voices. Lady Eleanor was already there, so I returned to my room." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "You admit to prowling the corridors?" "I was worried about Diana," Langley repeated stubbornly. "Finally, Miss Diana Ashley." She was still shaken, eyes red from weeping. "I didn't imagine it," she insisted before Poirot could speak. "There was someone in my room. I felt watched, evil. And later, when Sir Reginald was killed, I was with Lady Eleanor. We talked until nearly 3. Then we dozed. The second scream woke us both. Poirot leaned forward. Mademoiselle, you are young, perhaps in love with Mr. Langley. Did Lady Eleanor speak of her husband, of money, of the future? Diana hesitated. She said Reginald had changed his will recently, that if anything happened to him, she would be left with nothing. She was angry, but she didn't say she'd kill him. Poirot sat back. The pieces were beginning to arrange themselves, yet gaps remained. After luncheon, a meal no one tasted, he explored the secret passages with Captain Trevose and Dr. Pierce. They entered through the panel in the late Sir Reginald's bedroom. The passages were narrow, dusty, winding behind the walls like veins. A thin layer of dust showed recent disturbance in several places, footprints too smudged to identify. One branch led down a cramped stair to a concealed door behind the library chimney. From there, an intruder could have entered unseen. Another passage opened near the French windows, explaining how the murderer might have left the library without using the main door, creating the illusion of an outside killer. But the fog had erased all traces on the terrace. By late afternoon, Poirot gathered everyone once more in the drawing-room. "I have learned much," he said. "Motives abound. Money, revenge, love betrayed. Alibis are fragile. Most of you were alone at the critical time. The secret passages allow access to almost every room. The murder weapon, a Kurdish dagger from Sir Reginald's own collection, was taken from a display in this very room." He paused. Yet certain facts do not fit. The anonymous letters began before the guests arrived, suggesting the writer knew the party would gather. The figure in Miss Ashley's room was meant to frighten, to create confusion. And the unfinished letter. Sir Reginald was about to reveal something important. Mrs. Blackstone leaned forward. "Then who did it, monsieur?" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience. The little grey cells require one more piece. Tonight, perhaps, the murderer will move again, for the trap is not yet fully sprung." Outside, the fog remained absolute, a thick white wall sealing them from the world. Inside, suspicion had thickened into something almost tangible. As evening fell and lamps were lit against the gloom, Poirot felt the tension rise like a tide. The killer, he knew, was watching, waiting for an opportunity. And Hercule Poirot, with his passion for order, prepared to set his own trap in the heart of the fog-covered manor. Chapter 6. Secrets Unearthed. The second night in Shadowbrook Manor fell heavier than the first, as though the fog itself had grown weary of holding back the darkness. Lamps were lit early, fires built high, yet the chill persisted. A chill that came less from the weather than from the knowledge that a murderer walked among them. Hercule Poirot spent the afternoon alone in the library, the scene of the crime now sealed to all but him. He moved methodically, examining the Kurdish dagger, cleaned by the police when they came, but he studied photographs he had instructed Hargreaves to take. Measuring distances, noting the exact position of furniture, the angle of the stab wound, as described by Dr. Pierce. Most of all, he thought. At 5 o'clock, as a cold tea was brought in untouched, Poirot summoned Captain Trevose and Dr. Pierce once more. Together they re-entered the secret passages, this time with stronger electric torches. The narrow corridors behind the walls were a warren, some barely shoulder-wide, others opening into small priests' holes furnished with rotting prayer stools. Cobwebs hung like veils, and the air was thick with centuries of dust. Yet the recent disturbances were clear, footprints in several directions, scuffs on the stone steps, even a torn scrap of black lace caught on a nail. "Mrs. Blackstone's dress," Trevose suggested gruffly. "Possible," Poirot replied, "or torn deliberately to mislead." They followed one passage downward until it ended at a stout oak door, padlocked from the inside. "The old chapel cellar," Pierce explained, "disused since the Reformation. Sir Reginald kept wine there once, but the damp ruined it." The lock was new, bright metal gleaming against ancient wood. Poirot examined it closely. "This has been replaced recently. And see, the key is still in the lock on this side." Trevose tried the door. It opened with a groan onto stone steps descending into blackness. A damp, earthy smell rose to meet them. They descended cautiously. At the bottom, their torches revealed a brick-vaulted chamber, racks empty save for a few Molderon bottles. In the centre stood a deal table, and upon it a pile of papers. Poirot approached. The top sheet was one of the anonymous letters, identical in block printing to those received by Sir Reginald. Beneath it lay drafts, half-written accusations, discarded phrases. And beneath those, a ledger. Poirot opened it carefully. Columns of figures, dates from 1916, 1918, munitions contracts, shipping manifests, insurance claims. Certain entries were marked in red: ships lost, cargoes unaccounted for, payments from foreign accounts. "Profiteering," Trevose muttered. "The letters were right." "Or half right," Poirot corrected. "Observe, the final entries are in a different hand, smaller, neater. Someone continued the ledger after Sir Reginald abandoned it." Pierce adjusted his spectacles. "That's Victor Langley's handwriting. I've seen his secretarial work." They searched further. In a niche behind a loose brick, Poirot found a small tin box. Inside, a bundle of love letters, tied with faded ribbon, addressed to "My darling Eleanor," and signed V. "Langley and Lady Eleanor," Trevose said, "before her marriage." "But also," Poirot added, holding up one letter dated only 6 months ago, "after." They returned upstairs in silence, the discoveries heavy between them. Dinner that evening was a grim ritual. Places were set, but no one sat in Sir Reginald's chair. It remained empty, a silent accusation. Conversation was minimal. Lady Eleanor's hand trembled as she passed the salt. Victor Langley avoided her gaze. Mrs. Blackstone watched everyone with hawk-like intensity. After the meal, Poirot requested that all gather in the drawing-room. "I have spent the day unearthing secrets," he began, standing before the fire. "This house, it is like an onion, layer upon layer, and at the centre, always, the truth." He laid the ledger on a side table. "This records certain irregularities in Sir Reginald's wartime business. Ships insured heavily, then lost, profits made, but the later entries, they are not in his hand." Langley started. I kept his books for the last 5 years. He asked me to reconcile old records." "Indeed," Poirot said mildly. "But why continue the old system of red marks for lost cargoes when no such cargoes existed after 1918? Langley paled. Poirot produced the love letters next. Lady Eleanor gasped. "These speak of a passion rekindled, of plans for a future together, once Sir Reginald was removed." "That's a lie!" Langley cried. "Those old letters were from before." "But this one," Poirot held up the recent letter, "is not old. It speaks of inheritance, of patience wearing thin." Lady Eleanor rose, white-faced. "You spy and pry. I seek truth, madame," Mrs. Blackstone's voice cut across. "So my brother was murdered for money and lust. Hardly original." "Patience," Poirot said again. "There is more." He turned to Dr. Pierce. "You, Monsieur le Docteur, knew of the heart condition. You prescribed digitalis. Yet Sir Reginald's symptoms began only after the anonymous letters started. Curious timing. Pierce met his gaze steadily. Stress can trigger angina. Or poison can mimic it, Poirot replied softly. Digitalis in small doses over time weakens the heart, creates anxiety, chest pain, then a larger dose. Nonsense, Pierce snapped. I've been his friend for 20 years. Friendship and money are often uneasy bedfellows, Poirot observed. Sir Reginald's will, before recent changes, left a substantial legacy to you, no? Pierce hesitated. A bequest for research. Hardly a fortune. Captain Trevose broke in angrily. This is all speculation. What about the passages? Anyone could have— Precisely, Poirot interrupted. Anyone. And someone did, twice. Once to frighten Miss Ashley, creating confusion. Once to kill. He moved to the French windows, drawing back the curtains. The fog was as thick as ever, but for a moment a faint breeze stirred it. Yet certain things do not fit. The murderer entered the library through the passage, struck from behind, then left by the French window to suggest an outside killer. But the window was latched by Hargreaves at 1:30. To leave that way, the murderer must have returned later to unlatch it, or had an accomplice. Silence fell. Or, Poirot continued, the murderer never left by the window at all. The unlatched window was another false trail. He turned suddenly to Miss Diana Ashley. Mademoiselle, you screamed twice. The first time, a figure stood watching you. The second scream woke the house to murder. Yet you were with Lady Eleanor after the first incident. How then did you scream the second time? Diana's eyes widened. I didn't. The second scream wasn't me. Exactly. Someone else screamed, deliberately, to ensure the body was discovered quickly, before rigour set in and complicated the time of death. Mrs. Blackstone leaned forward. Then who? A sudden crash interrupted her. The lights flickered wildly and died, plunging the room into darkness. Screams rose, genuine this time. Furniture scraped, a glass shattered. Stay still, Poirot commanded. Captain, your torch! Light flared as Trevose switched on his electric torch. In its beam, figures froze like statues. Victor Langley stood halfway to the door, face contorted. Lady Eleanor had risen, hands to her throat. Dr. Pierce held a poker from the fireplace. Mrs. Blackstone's cane was raised like a weapon. But Miss Diana Ashley was missing. She was beside me a moment ago, Lady Eleanor cried. They searched frantically. The drawing-room doors were locked from inside. No one had left. Yet Diana was gone. Poirot's torch beam swept the walls and stopped at a section of panelling slightly ajar. The passages again, Trevose growled. They forced the panel wider. A narrow gap yawned, and from it came a muffled sob. Captain Trevose plunged in, Poirot close behind. 20 feet along, they found her, Diana, bound and gagged with her own scarf, eyes wide with terror above the cloth. They freed her swiftly. She collapsed against Langley, who had followed, sobbing. "Someone grabbed me in the dark," she gasped, "dragged me in here. I thought I was going to die." Poirot examined the bonds. Simple knots, quickly tied. "The murderer grows desperate," he said quietly. "Striking again, even with us all together. The net tightens and the fish thrashes." Back in the drawing room, lights restored by the generator, suspicion had reached fever pitch. Accusations flew. Langley at Pierce, Pierce at Langley, Mrs. Blackstone at everyone. Poirot raised his voice above the babel. "Enough! Tomorrow I will reveal all. The pieces are nearly in place, but tonight no one must be alone. Pair yourselves, Captain Trevose. You will guard the passages with the footman. Doors will be locked, windows checked." Slowly, reluctantly, order was restored. Pairs formed, Lady Eleanor with Mrs. Blackstone, an uneasy alliance, Langley with Pierce, Diana refusing to leave Lady Eleanor's side. Poirot retired last, pausing on the landing. From somewhere deep in the house came that familiar scratching, insistent now, almost frantic. He stood listening until it stopped. In his room, he did not undress fully. Instead, he sat in the dark by the window, watching the fog. The secrets of Shadowbrook Manor had been unearthed. Greed, betrayal, forbidden love, old crimes. Yet the greatest secret, the identity of the killer, remained just out of reach, but not for long. Tomorrow, Poirot vowed silently, the little grey cells would complete their work. The murderer would be unmasked. And in the ancient house, wrapped in its shroud of mist, the final act approached. Chapter 7. The Second Strike. The third morning brought no relief from the fog. If anything, it had sunk lower, wrapping the manor in a damp shroud that muffled every sound and turned the world beyond the windows into a blank wall of grey. Inside Shadowbrook Manor, fear had hardened into a brittle crust over the inhabitants. No one spoke above a whisper, and every footstep echoed with suspicion. Hercule Poirot had not slept. He had spent the hours before dawn in the secret passages, moving silently with a shaded torch, mapping every twist and turn, noting every crevice where something might be hidden. He emerged at first light, such as it was, dusty but satisfied. The little grey cells were aligning the final pieces. Breakfast was abandoned after a few bites. Poirot gathered the diminished party in the drawing-room at 10 o'clock. The fire burned brightly, yet no one felt its warmth. "Today," Poirot announced, "the truth will be spoken, but first we must survive the day. The murderer knows the net closes. Desperate people strike again." He assigned watches. Captain Trevose and Dr. Pierce were to patrol the ground floor and passages in shifts. The women, Lady Eleanor, Mrs. Blackstone, and Miss Ashley, were to remain together in the morning room with the door locked. Victor Langley was paired with Poirot himself. "Keep your eyes open, mon capitaine," Poirot instructed Trevose privately, "especially upon the doctor and upon Mr. Langley." The morning passed in oppressive quiet. Poirot and Langley sat in the library, ostensibly examining papers, but Poirot's attention was on the young man. Langley chain-smoked, his fingers trembling as he lit each new cigarette from the stub of the last. "You are nervous, monsieur," Poirot observed. "Wouldn't you be?" Langley snapped. "One man dead, Diana attacked. Anyone could be next." "Or perhaps," Poirot said softly, "you fear being exposed rather than attacked." Langley crushed out his cigarette viciously. "I've told you everything." "No, you have told me much, but not all." Before Langley could reply, a shout echoed from the hall. Captain Trevose's voice, sharp with alarm. Poirot and Langley rushed out to find Trevose kneeling beside Dr. Pierce at the foot of the main staircase. The doctor lay crumpled, one arm twisted beneath him, blood seeping from a gash on his temple. "He's alive," Trevose said grimly as Poirot knelt. "Breathing steady but out cold. Must have fallen or been pushed." Pierce's medical bag lay open nearby, vials scattered. A heavy bronze statue from the newel post, a raven matching the family crest, lay toppled on the stairs above. "An accident?" Langley asked doubtfully. "Or another attempt?" Poirot murmured. He examined the statue. Fingerprints smudged in the dust, but one clear print on the base. Someone struck him from behind, then arranged the statue to suggest a fall while descending. Trevose carried Pierce to a sofa in the morning room. The women gathered round anxiously as the doctor slowly regained consciousness. "Head splitting," Pierce groaned. "Was going down for my bag. Someone behind me. Push, then nothing." "You saw no one?" "No, but I heard breathing, close." Poirot noted the timing. Pierce had been alone for only moments, while Trevose checked the upper passages. The attack deepened the paralysis of fear. No one felt safe now, not even in pairs. Luncheon was impossible. Instead, Poirot ordered strong tea and insisted everyone remain in the drawing room together. No exceptions. "We stay in sight of one another," he declared. "The murderer cannot strike openly." They sat in a tense circle, Lady Eleanor pale and drawn, Mrs. Blackstone gripping her cane like a weapon, Diana clinging to Langley's arm. Trevose standing guard at the door, Pierce on a chaise with a cold compress to his head. The afternoon dragged. Rain began, a soft hiss against the windows. The fog seemed to pulse with it. At 4 o'clock, as weak tea was served, the lights flickered again, twice, and died. "Not again!" Trevose growled, reaching for his torch. But this time the darkness lasted only seconds. When light returned, Mrs. Lavinia Blackstone was slumped forward in her chair, eyes closed, a thin line of blood trickling from her nostril. Diana screamed. Poirot reached the old woman first. Her pulse was steady but weak. He sniffed at the teacup beside her. Almonds, faint but unmistakable. "Poison," he said grimly. "Cyanide, I believe. Rapid, but not instant in this dose." Dr. Pierce, still groggy, staggered over. "Potassium cyanide. Smell is classic. We must induce vomiting." They worked quickly. Salt water, fingers down the throat. Mrs. Blackstone retched violently, bringing up much of the tea. Colour slowly returned to her face. She opened her eyes at last, gasping. "Tea, bitter, thought it was the leaves." Poirot examined the pot. Only Mrs. Blackstone's cup showed traces of white powder at the bottom, dissolved hastily, but not completely. "Someone added poison while the lights failed," he said. "A matter of seconds. Bold, very bold." Mrs. Blackstone fixed him with a fierce stare. "Find him, monsieur, before he finishes us all." The double attack, first Pierce, then Mrs. Blackstone, shattered the last pretence of calm. Accusations erupted. "You were nearest the teapot, Langley," Trevose roared. "I never touched it," Langley shouted back. Lady Eleanor began to weep silently. Diana looked from face to face in growing horror. Poirot raised his hands for silence. "Enough! These attacks tell us much. The murderer panics. First, to silence Dr. Pierce, who knew too many medical truths. Then Mrs. Blackstone, who knew the family history intimately. Both failed, fortunately." He turned to Pierce. "Monsieur le Docteur, the digitalis. You said Sir Reginald took it regularly. Yet when I examined his room this morning, the bottle was almost full. Curious, no?" Pierce hesitated. He sometimes forgot doses." "Or perhaps," Poirot continued, "someone replaced the digitalis with harmless chalk tablets, then administered real digitalis in his whiskey the night he died, producing a fatal arrhythmia. The dagger merely to ensure death and mislead." Pierce went very still. "And the cyanide," Poirot went on, "comes from your medical bag, does it not? I noticed a small vial missing when we tended you earlier." All eyes turned to Dr. Pierce. I keep cyanide for experimental purposes," he stammered, "but anyone could have taken it." Trevose stepped forward menacingly. "You were attacked yourself. Convenient." "To deflect suspicion," Poirot suggested. "A calculated risk." Pierce rose unsteadily. "This is madness. I've been Reginald's friend. Friend. Mrs. Blackstone croaked from her chair, or air. The original will left you a fortune for your precious research. Then Reginald changed it, after the letters began, after you began them. Pierce's face twisted. He was going to expose me. Old debts I covered with his money years ago. I tried to frighten him into silence. When that failed, he lunged suddenly, not at his accusers, but toward the French windows, fumbling with the latch. Trevose tackled him before he could open it. The two men struggled fiercely until Langley and Poirot subdued the doctor. Bound with curtain cords, Pierce slumped in defeat. "It was all for the work," he muttered. "The research would have saved thousands. Reginald understood once. He promised the money. Then that woman," he glared at Lady Eleanor, "whispered in his ear, and he changed everything." Lady Eleanor met his gaze coldly. "I merely reminded him where his duty lay." Poirot stood over the captive. "You wrote the letters. You forged the later ledger entries to resurrect old scandals. You used the passages, knowing them from years of visiting this house. You frightened Miss Ashley to create confusion. You poisoned Sir Reginald's whisky with digitalis, then stabbed him when it took too long. The attacks today, desperate attempts to silence those who might expose you." Pierce laughed bitterly. "Prove it." "I shall," Poirot replied calmly. "The fingerprint on the bronze raven is yours, the one clear print. The cyanide vial has your monogram. And in the passage behind this room, I found your discarded medical gloves, stained with Sir Reginald's blood." Silence fell, broken only by the rain. Outside, as if in response to the confession, the fog began to thin. A faint breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the distant sound of a motor engine. Help approaching at last. But inside, the second strike had failed. The murderer was unmasked, yet the revelation brought no triumph, only a weary recognition of human frailty. One more act remained, the formal denouement, where every thread would be tied, every motive laid bare. As the light grew stronger and the mist retreated, Hercule Poirot prepared for the final gathering. The little grey cells had triumphed again, but the cost, in fear and betrayal, had been high. Chapter 8. The Little Grey Cell's Triumph. The fog began to lift in the late afternoon, as though the Devonmores themselves had grown tired of concealing the truth. Pale sunlight filtered through the drawing-room windows for the first time in days, striking golden motes from the dust and illuminating the weary faces gathered there one last time. Dr. Malcolm Pierce sat bound in a high-backed chair, his head bowed, the fight gone from him. Captain Trevose stood guard nearby, arms folded, face grim. Lady Eleanor, Mrs. Blackstone, still pale from the poison, and Miss Diana Ashley occupied the sofa, while Victor Langley hovered protectively near Diana. The servants had been dismissed. This was a matter for the house's inhabitants alone. Hercule Poirot stood before the fireplace, small and immaculate, his green eyes bright with the satisfaction of order restored. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and precise, "the time has come for the final explanation. You have all suffered much in these days of fog and fear. Now you shall know why Sir Reginald died, and at whose hand." He paused, letting the silence settle. "Let us return to the beginning. Sir Reginald invited me here because he had received anonymous letters, accusations of war profiteering. He believed the writer to be someone close, someone who would be among his guests. He wished me present as protection. But the letters were only the first act. Their true purpose was not to expose old sins, but to create an atmosphere of suspicion and dread, in which murder could be committed and passed off as the work of an avenger. Poirot turned to Dr. Pierce. You, Doctor, were the author. For 20 years you had been Sir Reginald's friend and physician. You knew every secret of this house, the passages, the family history, even the old ledger hidden in the chapel cellar. You knew, too, that the original will left you a fortune for medical research. A fortune you desperately needed, for your experiments had outgrown your means and debts pressed heavily. Pierce stirred but said nothing. When Sir Reginald remarried and began to question certain past loans you had taken from him, loans covered by creative accounting, you feared exposure. Then Lady Eleanor's influence grew, and Sir Reginald spoke of changing his will. You could not permit that. So you resurrected the old scandal. You forged entries in the ledger to make the profiteering seem ongoing. You wrote the anonymous letters, timing them to coincide with the house party. You even arranged for the final threatening note to be left on the doorstep, slipping out through the passages and returning the same way while we were all upstairs. Mrs. Blackstone nodded slowly. Clever and cruel. Indeed, Poirot continued. On the night of the murder, you waited until the house was quiet. You knew Sir Reginald's habit of working late when troubled. You entered the library through the secret passage behind the chimney. But first, you prepared his whisky with a massive dose of digitalis, enough to cause fatal heart failure within the hour. You had already, over weeks, replaced his legitimate tablets with harmless substitutes, so that he would show symptoms of worsening angina and no one would suspect poison. But digitalis can be unpredictable. When you returned later and found him still alive, though weakening, you panicked. You took the Kurdish dagger from its display in the drawing room earlier that evening, and you stabbed him from behind as he stood at the fire. Then you unlatched the French window and left it ajar, suggesting an intruder from outside. The scream that woke the house was your own work. You imitated a woman's cry from the passages, knowing it would bring us all downstairs quickly, before the digitalis could be detected as the primary cause, Captain Trevose growled. And the attack on Miss Ashley? A blind, Poirot replied, to create general terror and confusion. You entered her room through the panel, stood silently until she woke and screamed, then fled back into the walls. The open door was meant to suggest the intruder had escaped into the corridor. Lady Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice cold. And the attempts on Mrs. Blackstone and himself? The net was closing, Poirot said. Mrs. Blackstone knew the family finances intimately. She might have remembered that the research bequest was the old will's centerpiece. You tried to silence her with cyanide taken from your own bag, added during the brief darkness at tea. As for your own attack, you struck yourself with the bronze raven after staging a fall, knowing a minor concussion would lend credibility to your innocence. A desperate gamble, but you are a medical man. You knew how to minimize real harm. Pierce lifted his head at last. His voice was hoarse. It was all for the work. The research would have saved thousands, new treatments for heart disease. Reginald promised the money years ago. He understood the greater good. Then he let that woman twist him. Lady Eleanor's eyes flashed. I reminded him of his duty to his family name, yes, but I never asked him to betray a friend. Poirot inclined his head. Motives are always complex. Greed, fear, betrayal, all played their part. But in the end, Doctor, you killed not for science, but for money to continue science. A perversion of a noble calling. He turned to the others. You all had motives that seemed strong. Captain Trevos's ruined investments, Mr. Langley and Lady Eleanor's forbidden love, Mrs. Blackstone's family pride. Even Miss Ashley might have been drawn in to protect her friend. I examined each possibility, but only Dr. Pierce had the means, the medical knowledge, the access to poisons, the intimate familiarity with the house's secrets. Outside, the sound of motor cars crunching on gravel announced the arrival of the police, delayed but finally victorious over the retreating fog. Poirot allowed himself a small sigh. The little grey cells, they have done their work. Order is restored. Symmetry returns. As constables entered to take Pierce away, the doctor paused before Poirot. "You are everything they say, monsieur," he said bitterly. "I almost succeeded." "Almost," Poirot replied softly, "but murder is never perfect. It offends the little grey cells, and they do not forgive." The sun broke fully through then, flooding the room with light. Shadows fled to the corners, and the ancient manor seemed to breathe more freely. One by one, the survivors dispersed, some to give statements, others simply to stand in the garden and feel clean air on their faces after days of confinement. Hercule Poirot remained a moment longer, gazing at the now empty chair where the murderer had sat. Another case concluded. Another triumph for order over chaos. He twirled his moustaches with satisfaction, then turned toward the door. Outside, the Devon moors stretched wide and clear. The fog vanished as completely as the shadows it had hidden. And Hercule Poirot, with his passion for truth and precision, walked into the sunlight, already anticipating his next cup of thick, sweet hot chocolate, properly prepared, in perfect symmetry.